Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this event. Just a little background on us. The Pitt Law Voting Rights Project is a nonpartisan group devoted to increasing student engagement in the election process by encouraging voter registration as well as participation in the democratic process, whether it be as poll workers or election protection volunteers. We're excited to have our speakers with us today and to discuss the importance of local elections and political engagement. Just so you're all aware, we have a couple other events that are going to be coming up soon. So we have a voting rights trivia night that's going to happen on October 7th at 7 p.m. There's also going to be voting rights training info sessions led by Professor Allen on October 14th and 20th. These will be to help prepare anyone who has signed up to be either a poll worker or election protection volunteer. And I am going to send a link in the chat to see if you wanted to sign up to get notifications about our upcoming events. So I'll send that shortly. Just a quick rundown of the event. Each of our speakers is going to have some time to talk. Please feel free to add questions in the Q&A box. You're going to open the Q&A window by clicking the button across the bottom of the screen. And if you're on a mobile device, you can access the Q&A window by tapping your screen, tap more or the three dots, and then tap the Q&A option. We're going to wait until the end to address the questions. So we'll address them live. So if you do have a question for a specific speaker, please make that note and we'll make sure that we say that at that time. We're excited you're all here and spending your Tuesday evening with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Professor Allen.
Thank you, Alex. My students are now all like such total tech experts on Zoom. It's a little scary, isn't it? To me anyway. But so welcome again to everybody. We're thrilled you're here. And the whole idea for today's event was really to take a step back for a minute from the poll worker, election protection volunteer, registration specifics, and basically ask, well, why bother, as Bette Midler says, right? Like, why bother? Because there's a sense sometimes that we're going through these motions or being told to vote, 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 and there's not a lot of real substance behind why it matters. And I think it's very easy to become completely obsessed with the top of the ticket. I think many of us are. And the notion for today was to take a look at local politics and to ask, and I hope provide some answers for why local politics really matters. I saw somebody say something recently, I'll see if I can reproduce this quote. It was Margaret Rankle in the Times. She said, outrage is the currency of our times, but it doesn't actually buy anything. Action buys change. And so the thought here was to get three different people in the neck of our Pittsburgh woods who have been involved in real political action and engagement locally, who have three very different backgrounds and approaches to talk about their engagement, how that happened, and why local politics really matters. So without further ado, I'm just going to quickly introduce the three of them, and they'll each give a presentation, and then we'll have some time for discussion. So first up is going to be Terri Minor Spencer. She's a political organizer and president of the group West End P.O.W.E.R. And after Terri talks, we're going to hear from Marco Attisano. Marco is a recent grad of Pitt Law, 2013. He was my student. And after that, he was an assistant DA for a while. He's now in private practice, but is very devoted to political engagement. He's a former candidate for state assembly, and he's currently the director of Conor Lamb's voter protection program. And then last but not least, we'll hear from Marie Norman. She's a professor at the Pitt Medical School. She's an anthropologist by training, and she is a grassroots organizer who's been very active in the last few years in the Pittsburgh area. So thanks all for coming, and I'll turn it over to Terri.
So thank you. Yes. Let me start from the beginning. Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful to be here and excited to share the importance of local offices and how I got involved. So for me, it was extremely unique and different. So back in the early 90s, mid 90s, I had a very bad drug addiction. And instead of the judge giving me a rehab, I got sentenced to 16 years in prison. So I went to prison. I did the 16 years. I came home and was devastated by what I saw in our community. I know when I left, we had a rec center, we had places to go, we had after school programs, places for seniors. It was just everything that a child up to vets to seniors needed and wanted in a community. I came home, it was absolutely none of that. Long story short, I went to this career development course because, of course, when I came home, I literally said to my counselor in Renewal Center, I said, I do not know how to do an interview for a job. I was extremely honest, which helped me in the long run. So they put me in this career development course. It was a nine-week career development course. After the last day of graduation, I submitted my application to an organization that was called P.O.W.E.R Foundation. Long story short on that, on the third interview, Mark Lewis hired me as the assistant manager to him, and then the scholarship manager, which had me into how to do grants and scholarships for kids going to school. If you don't know P.O.W.E.R Foundation, the mission is they cater to African Americans going to private school to help with the tuition. So I remember one day I said to him, to my boss, I said, I want to do a community day, because when I came home, let me step back a little bit. When I came home, where I grew up at, Broadhead Manor in Westgate Village, it was no longer there. So everyone that I have known, everyone that I knew, people that I was hoping to see when I came home, it was literally gone. A warehouse had bought it was flatted out. It was just literally gone. So so I remember saying to my boss, I said, I want to get everybody back and have a community day. So he said, well, who's your city council? I said, what's that? So he looked at me and, he put in my zip code. He told me who my city council was. And it went from there that I got very interested into meeting other people. Like, why don't we have what we're supposed to have? And if I go across a bridge, that community looks extremely different than our community, and why, so it became very clear it was not because of funding or money. It became very clear it was because of the zip code we were in. So I started reading a lot. I read up as I'm working, I knew about nonprofits. So I started a grassroots nonprofit, West End P.O.W.E.R. And we had collaborated with Pittsburgh Literacy Council, because we started out with giving men and women coming home a GED. We would, give them classes, how to get their GED, how to get jobs. Everything I learned, I was giving back, giving it to everybody. Anything that I learned, I would always tell someone. Long story short, I kept seeing everyone not going to prime. I was like, there was just an election last week. Like, nobody went to the vote. And it became very clear that the presidential election was the most important election in our community. And that ignorance became a weapon towards us, because we didn't know. We didn't know that the local elections affect our lives 365 days a year. So what West End P.O.W.E.R decided to do was, let's learn and then let's teach the community. This is what these offices do. So what we learned, what we started off with as like ward chairs, and then go to, what does this office do? Where is it at? When is the election? How much is the pay? It's like school board is free. Just we went through every single office local, and we started teaching, and it just morphed into a very, very, very educational, we call it the Educational Community Civic Series. Last year, we were invited to Montgomery, Alabama to teach down there the Civic Series. So that's how I got involved. I got involved with making sure that our community that is, we step outside and we see houses that landlords live in California or Oakland, and they come into our community and they buy them and then they leave it, and then it becomes blight, and so they have a connection with the magistrate. And so we started teaching to become a magistrate. You need a GED and you have to go to Harrisburg and take these classes. So our whole thing was educate ourselves to make sure that we know that in our lifetime, there may not be a time that you can pick up the phone and say, Mr. or Mrs. President, I need to see the budget. And what are you going to do with this budget in our community within your next 2, 4, 6 years? But in your local offices, you can literally say, I need to get on your calendar, or you need to put me on your calendar because I need to take back to our community what you plan to do with your budget within these 2, 4, 6 years. So that's how it started for me and West End P.O.W.E.R in educating ourselves with the importance of local offices and making sure that we all know that local offices affect our lives 365 days a year. So that's basically how it all morphed into learning. Then I met my husband, and then so then it all, and it just started. Then I got more involved in how to dismantle a machine that is not for us, and if it is for us, how to make it stronger. So I started to get into that and just became very heavy into making sure that the voiceless is heard, and making sure that, and when I say our ignorance, I mean, when you don't know something, you're ignorant to something. And so for years, it has been, our ignorance has been used as a weapon towards us. So our whole mission was to take that weapon and turn it back around and, use our power as our voice. And that's how we became involved in local offices. Yes.
Terri,
Yeah.
I wonder, could you talk a little about like an example of a time, or think about when you had some communication with either a local elected official or some political group that resulted, in had some kind of effect? I think a lot of times people believe that, again, well, you can say, this is your councilman, but he's not going to listen to you, Right. So how does that work? How do you actually interact with local politicians?
So yes, so first and foremost, you find out who represents you, like who, because we have to make sure that we get in our mind, because somehow we allow the switch to be flipped, that they are our boss and we are not their boss, and we have to always keep in front of us that anyone that we elect, you are their boss. So you find out who represents you, and you literally, how can I get on your calendar? What I do know is that we had seen that there was a lack of representation for Black men and women on the Democratic committee, the Allegheny County Democratic Committee. And so they weren't, you go on the website, it was right there to educate, how to get educated on how to run and how to, and what that seat does is, so if you were to run, me as a committee member will support you in anything you need to do. Do I need to knock on some doors? Do I do to make sure that you stay representing us? So what we did was we went out to the communities, we educated communities. This is what the ward seat does. This is what a ward chair does. This is the communities. These are the it's so gentrified. It's crazy because you could be on this side of the street and belong to Ward 10, and then cross the street belong to Ward 28. But but long story short, we taught it. 10 Black women learned about it. Well, there was like 15 people there. 10 Black people ran for the seat. 9 Black women run.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So 9 of us won our campaigns. And so now so that's part of, getting involved, making sure that you're doing more than just saying, I know this and I know that. And the biggest thing is anything that I have a habit of, and I hope that I continue to, I value that anything I learn, I give it away. I give it away so I can get filled up with some more. If I learn anything new, I give it away. Just give it, because that's how we build, So that was one example. I know another example is that there's a lot of unsolved murders over in the West End of Pittsburgh. And so I contacted the district attorney's office 2 years ago and was like, listen, there's a lot of unsolved murders in West End of Pittsburgh, and we need answers. We need to know, why haven't nobody, it's dozens. And why hasn't nobody, no family members that have not heard from anybody? So, yeah, so he said, the district attorney said, I promise you, if you bring the families, I will have the detectives that is over their case and give me 2 weeks, I'll have the families. I have 15 families, go over to the homicide division. The district attorney, he was a man of his word. He did have every single detective that was over these families' cases. And the sad part is that some of these cases stem back to the early and late 80s. Some mothers, there was mothers there that was like, my son got murdered 10 years ago and I've never heard from anybody, so that built up from that 15, 4 homicides have been solved. So out of the 15, so that started, so it's all about it's all about letting them know that you are extremely unapologetic and unafraid to open the door, cross the line, and sit. And nobody has to give you a chair. Bring up your own chairs, set up your own table, and be okay with it. And once someone knows that, I think anyone will get the answers that they are looking for. But where we make mistakes is that if we ask for something and then let it go, and 2 months later we're asking for it again, and then let it go, and then 2 years later, no. We have to be extremely consistent, and that's what our community is looking for, is someone to stand up and be unapologetic about moving forward with what we deserve. And we should be able to have our sidewalks that look just like the mayor's sidewalks, so that's how we feel. It doesn't matter who the mayor is. It doesn't matter who the district attorney is. It's just that West End P.O.W.E.R, myself, I stand extremely firm that even if I am treated unfairly, I'm going to continue to stand shoulder to shoulder and scream about it and speak about it. And, so yeah, until now I'm on policies and legislation though. So yeah.
Thank you. I love the concrete examples. I think those are really extraordinarily clear examples of how engagement locally can produce change that really does affect our lives.
Yes.
So why don't we switch over now to Marco at this point?
All right. And thank you all for being here today. And thank you to Professor Allen and Pitt Law for having me. And I just also enjoy being around Terri and Marie as well. So I'm glad they're here. That's one of the best things about getting involved in local politics, frankly. You get to meet a lot of other great people who care about making our communities better. And that phrase, care about making our communities better, that's really what drove me to get involved in local politics. After high school, I joined the Navy and I served in the military. I was in the Seabees, where I was on a battalion that did building and construction. And after my time in the Navy, I went to college and finished school, and then I did AmeriCorps. And I actually lived on the north side for a year while I did AmeriCorps, and we did free home repairs for low-income elderly folks throughout the city. It's a nonprofit called the Pittsburgh Project. And once that ended, I went to law school at Pitt. And I was one of Professor Allen's first students, actually, at Pitt Law.
It's true.
Yes, yes. And, through my time in undergrad and while at Pitt, I volunteered on multiple different campaigns, local campaigns, and just different capacities, knocking on doors, making phone calls, helping to stuff envelopes, just wherever I could be useful and helpful on a campaign that I was interested in, that's what I did. And so I volunteered on a handful of campaigns through undergrad and law school. And once I graduated from Pitt Law, I ended up, I was working at the district attorney's office as a law student, and I ended up working on a gubernatorial race. There was a primary race, and I worked for one of the candidates in the finance department there. And little did I know at that time that experience would kind of relate and I would be able to build on that into kind of where I am now involved in politics. I met Congressman Conor Lamb when I was in law school. We were both military veterans. He's a Marine veteran. I won't hold that against him. I'm a Navy vet, and we were both working in prosecutors' offices. He worked in the federal prosecutor's office, and I was working in the Allegheny County District Attorney's office at the time. We were both interested in politics and government. And so we struck up a friendship through that. And once he decided to run for Congress in the special election, I became his campaign treasurer. And my experience working on the gubernatorial campaign in the past in the finance department gave me the foundation to have the skill set to be the treasurer for Congressman Lamb's campaign. And I served as his campaign treasurer for, I think it was about a year and a half. And then I stepped away from that role to run for office myself. And I ran in a Democratic primary for the state assembly, a state representative seat. And one of the things that I realized through that process, and I really kind of zoned in on this prior to deciding to run, and it was one of the factors that motivated me to run, is that so much of what we think about as national policy issues, our state has a direct impact on and has a lot of power and authority over. For example, right now, we're hearing a lot about healthcare right now. We're hearing a lot about the Affordable Care Act. Most people probably don't realize that, let me back up 1 second. One of the things we hear about in the Affordable Care Act is the law that protects coverage for people with pre-existing conditions. So most people may not realize, that is the federal law, but they may not realize states can pass similar laws. So in Wisconsin, they did it. I believe it was Maine, and there's a few others. So the reason I bring that up as an example is it's very easy to think the Affordable Care Act is just a national issue, right? Because it's national federal legislation. But a state could also pass legislation to protect people with pre-existing conditions, and some states have done it. And there are multiple other policy areas that the states have power over, although we usually talk about them in national terms. I worked as an assistant district attorney, and I worked in the DA's office here for several years, and now I have my own private practice, and I represent a lot of people in the criminal justice system at all levels, in front of magistrates, at the Court of Common Pleas with jury trials, on direct appeals to the Superior Court, at PCRAs, which are where you raise ineffective assistance of counsel and try and get someone a new trial. It's like what the Innocence Project does. And one thing that we hear about a lot is criminal justice reform. And the state has so much control over that. State policy is really what affects criminal justice reform for the vast majority of people. The majority of people in the criminal justice system are in there through the state system. And like one little area that I'll bring up, and I do cases as private defense counsel, but I also work as a court-appointed public defender too. When a judge asks me to represent an indigent client as a court-appointed public defender, I'll take that case on. And one thing that is unique about Pennsylvania is that we don't have a statewide funding system for our public defenders. It's county by county, which creates inequalities of representation throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it also creates inefficiencies as well. And the vast majority of states have statewide funding. So that's an issue right there that the state assembly could address that directly affects, criminal justice reform. And, another thing we hear about, that we think about as a national issue a lot of times, is our environment and the laws that protect our environment. We have the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level. And here in Pennsylvania, we also have the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. And, one of the reasons I ran for state representative was I found out that our DEP was not being fully funded, that it was routinely being cut and cut and cut. And so, that was something that I realized at a local level, we can really affect our environmental policy for the state of Pennsylvania and the environmental protections we have. And just to give you a sense about a state representative seat, so the district I ran in was House District 30, and it had the Richland, Hampton, most of Shaler, some of O'Hara, and Fox Chapel communities. Approximately 68,000 people live there, and it's about 48,000 registered adult voters in that community. There's, I believe it's in Marie or Terry, Professor Allen may correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 203 state representatives in the state of Pennsylvania. Is it 203?
I'm not sure. I'll look it up. You keep talking. I'll find out.
Okay.
203.
And there's 50 state senators. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it kind of ties into the point Terry brought up. It's about responsiveness. So we have 18 members of Congress in Pennsylvania's congressional delegation. Okay, so, but we have, I believe it's 203 state representatives.
It is.
Then,
you're right.
Okay, and then an additional 50 state senators. So the point is that at a state level, there's so much control and power over policy that affects our everyday lives, and our representatives represent a smaller amount of people, fewer people. So they have to be more responsive to those people if people come and knock on their doors, so to speak. And so that's one area as well that has attracted me to local government and being involved in local politics. And so those are some of the things that really motivated me to run. And also too, right now I serve as the voter protection director for Congressman Conor Lamb. And I highlight that just to kind of say, get in where you fit in. There's different roles for different people. Like I had that experience working on the finance team for a campaign. So that led to being a treasurer for the congressional campaign. And then as an attorney, I've worked in the area of voter protection in a volunteer capacity years ago. And I built on that. And now it puts me in a place where I'm capable of being the voter protection director for the congressional campaign. And I guess I just want to reiterate that get in where you fit in with the local politics. If you're somebody who has a certain skill, take that into the political space and find a way to utilize it for a campaign that you may be interested in.
Fabulous. Thank you, Marco. So let's go to Marie.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for hosting us. And it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here with Terry, who's just an amazing person doing incredible things in this city, and Marco, who ran a fabulous, fabulous race. These are really good people. So it's a treat to be here.
I just want to point out that we got these three people to be coming from very different places, and I did not know that they all know each other, which does say something about local political engagement, at least in Pittsburgh, particularly when you recognize what very different backgrounds they have.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's quite interesting.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the relationship, politics is relationships, and local politics are just, you know, relationships on steroids. So everybody does know everybody else. So I grew up in a family of activists. My mother was really an activist when I was a kid, and in fact ran for U.S. Senate as a third-party candidate when I was growing up. And I have to say that my primary experience of that when I was a kid was embarrassment. I just wanted my mom to act normal, for God's sake, you know, and bake cookies or something like that. But I've gained more and more appreciation for the work she's done over time. But I think for a long time, I wasn't very involved in politics. You know, I did a little bit of canvassing during the Obama and Clinton campaigns, but not a lot. And then came the election of 2016, which was came as a huge shock to a lot of people, to a lot of Americans. And I remember waking up the day after that election with this sort of sickening recognition that my complacency and the complacency of other people like me had gotten us into a point, you know, into a pickle, into a dangerous political situation. And really taught me that we neglect politics at our peril. And the more I kind of dug into that issue, the more I started to realize that politics starts from the ground up. It starts at the local level. And in fact, the Tea Party movement was a classic example of politics done right, you know, in terms of building power from local positions and state positions on up. And so the day after the election, my husband and I decided to start a grassroots group. We decided we had to do something. And so we started a group called the Order of the Phoenix. And I'm going to show just a couple of slides here. It's just pictures, but this will sort of loop through here while I'm talking. But the Order of the Phoenix, the name was my husband's idea. So it comes from the Harry Potter group by that name. And it's one of many grassroots groups in Pittsburgh that started around the same time. And we wanted to use Facebook as kind of a platform for organizing. And we chose Facebook in part because I foolishly believed that that would allow me to kind of work this around my full-time job and family. Little did I know that this would end up being a full-time job on top of my other full-time job. And we sort of thought, my husband and I, that this would last a couple months, right? We didn't think this was going to last very long. It was going to kind of get us through the sort of worst of the post-election hangover. But it's 4 years later, and the group has, I'm going to get out of here now, over 8,000 members. From all over the country, though mostly in Western Pennsylvania. And we've been going hard for 4 years. So in our first year, we really focused on writing letters to and calling legislators. So we decided we were going to get involved and put pressure on legislators. And we wrote postcards and we made calls, and we, in the process, really taught ourselves a lot about how bills become law and go through committees and get sponsorship. And so it was an important learning experience, but it was also another wake-up call, because we realized often we were either sort of preaching to the converted, you know, people who were already on our side politically, or people who did not care what we thought. And so we were sending letter after letter to, you know, elected representatives who ignored us. And so in the second year of the group, we decided that we needed to change things on the level of who was in office, not just the pressure we applied to them once they got there. And so then at that point, we really started to focus on volunteering for local candidates. We worked on judge races, city council races, county council races, a district attorney's race, lots of state legislative races, state house, state senate. And when I say work, I meant we made thousands of phone calls. We fielded hundreds of door knocking, canvassing shifts. We raised money for candidates because campaigns are really expensive. Marco can testify to it. And it's probably one of the worst aspects of campaigning is having to beat the bushes for money. We wrote hundreds and thousands of postcards to voters. And one of the things, and this comes back to what Professor Allen said, is in the process, you make a lot of new relationships. You meet people, you talk to elected officials, you form relationships with people who have influence at various levels and information. And that gives you more influence, it gives you more information, and it gives you ways to kind of start making inroads into the issues that matter to you. So, and I wanted to say, I think Marco covered this really nicely, but a lot of our focus has been on state races as well as local races for all the reasons Terry said. And here are a couple reasons why state races, I think, and local races are such rich areas for political involvement, is that it's so much easier to make a difference. So few people vote in sort of off-year elections. And so a little goes a very long way there. A little bit of canvassing, a little bit of money, it all goes much farther. The other is that state and local leaders become national leaders. That some of the people whose races we've been working on now will eventually become congresspeople and senators and maybe even presidents. Also, state laws become national laws. You know, Romney Care, which was a state level experiment in healthcare policy, became the ACA and Obamacare. So it's sort of a test ground for policy at the state level. And two things I think I really learned from working on state races. One is that numbers matter, majorities matter. I hear a lot when I'm out talking to voters that it's sort of like, I don't care about politics, I just care about the person. I care about, you know, sort of their personality and integrity. But I'm here to say numbers matter. You know, the number of people in a particular party determine majorities when it comes to voting, but also the composition of committees and the leadership of committees. And committees have enormous power in terms of even which bills are ever heard. So we have wonderful legislation that's been introduced in our state House and Senate that is never voted on because the people who control those committees won't allow it to come to a vote. And so the issue of kind of simply which party has control is important in its own right, individuals aside. Another is that it's important to know sort of where you can influence policy at the local or the state or the national level, that if you're targeting the wrong level, you often don't get much done. So, for example, one issue that's been very much in the news is police violence. And we've seen in Pittsburgh, well, we've seen all over the country, that when there are police shootings of unarmed Black men, people take to the streets, usually very angry at the mayor and the police chief, sometimes for good reason. The mayor and police chief have a loud voice, they're in a position to condemn that, and they've got various kinds of power that they can exert. But often, the things that really influence whether you can fire dirty cops and violent cops and racist cops are determined at the state level, they're determined by state laws that govern things like, you know, sort of binding arbitration and what happens when a police officer is fired and the union challenges it. And so a lot of the things that we're currently looking at in terms of changing policy around policing have to be addressed at the state level. Also things like, things that seem like they might be national, like reproductive rights. We're looking at a new Supreme Court composition and potentially an overturning of Roe v. Wade. There are important things that happen at the national level that could influence things like reproductive rights, but look at how much control states have. So many southern states have basically instituted policies that make it logistically impossible to have abortion clinics and have sort of functionally outlawed abortion, even if they haven't changed the sort of high level laws that govern that. And so those are examples of places where the state, where things that happen at the state level can be enormously, you know, influential and powerful. So I guess coming back to my mother, which is where I started this. She's 80-some years old. She has Alzheimer's, but she is still involved politically. I'm sure she's going to be watching the debates tonight. And I think what I really want to do is come down on the point that that Marco made, which is get in where you fit in, that every generation has to kind of find its way into civic life and into politics. And I would encourage you to do it. It's exciting. It is a great way to meet really, really cool people, good people, people who, you know, believe in what they're doing and are working very hard. And I also think that activism on this level is one of the best antidotes I've ever found to fear and uncertainty, and I recommend it.
Thank you, Marie. That's fabulous. And I couldn't agree more about how being active is, if not an antidote, at least a bit of a pushback to fear and feelings of incapacity, right? It just, there's nothing like actually stepping outside. And also an antidote to the kind of alienation that I think we more and more experience, of this sort of identification of me as like, you know, me and the stuff in my apartment, right? And without a sense, or perhaps me and my nuclear family who I'm holding all their hands, as opposed to a real democratic identification with the society, with my country, with my state, with my community, my county. You know, that's what democracy is really about.
Absolutely. One of the most empowering things I think about this little run over the last 4 years was going out into rural Pennsylvania to knock doors for Conor Lamb in an area with, you know, a huge range of political ideologies, and realizing just how complicated people's politics are, how interesting people are, and how generally kinder and more approachable they are than the media would lead you to believe, you know, when you're outside your bubble and outside your comfort zone. And that for me was really heartening.
Yeah, thanks. So I see that we have a couple of questions. Alex has been monitoring, so I'm going to ask her to read the questions that have come in for the panel.
Yeah, so we had a previous question regarding diversity on the ACDC, and someone was just interested in knowing what we can do to promote diversity on the ACDC, whether it's more in general or by getting certain candidates supported. I don't know if anybody has any information on that.
Great. Terry, first tell us what ACDC stands for.
Allegheny County Democratic Committee.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I would like to answer that question, but I have a bigger question. Why when I talk, I still stay in the square? But I don't.
I saw you big just now. You were big.
Yeah, you were the featured speaker when you were speaking.
Okay,
there,
cool.
Now you're big.
Okay, so yes, great question. I'm glad someone asked that question. Who was that? You said Alex? Who asked that, Alex?
That's Joe, but I don't think that he's here anymore.
Okay, well, if someone would like to share with Joe that yes, the conversation and it is on the table. What had happened was, you know, we had went and got with Bethany Halem, which is the Allegheny County at large councilwoman, and asked how can we all get at the table to address, you know, I don't want to, this is bipartisan, okay. I don't want to say someone's inability because of age or race, but it is, you know, it was plain to see that there was no one of color on the committee. There was no one, I think there was a young man that was like 40 some odd years old. He was the youngest person on the committee. Everyone has, and that position literally is who supports whom. You know what I'm saying? So it's a very, 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 very important seat. And yes, there are things being done right now. If COVID did not come up, that was being addressed Allegheny wide. it was trying to be dismantled and built back up, if that makes any sense. So that was the outlook of how to fix or to even start to address, what's going on with the Allegheny County Democratic Committee. Because I can say that, when you asked about, one of the examples, when I said that, 10 Black women did run, 9 of us did win. The very next day, the way that you run for the seat was taken off of the website.
Ooh.
Yeah, so it was, we have none of us 9 have ever got an email, a phone call, a letter, or anything like that. So it is being addressed. And like I said, if COVID did not attack us, it probably will be, some more answers would be able to, I will be able to give you better answers, but right now, because of COVID, but I can let anyone that would like to know, it is on the table. And if, anything, just a little bit about me, it will not be taken off of the table.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Marco, we have a question for you. Karen wants to know if we can address the issue on the ballot about changing voting for PA justices by district versus statewide.
Yes, so the PA Supreme Court has 7 justices, and they're elected. Some states appoint. Pennsylvania elects our justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they're statewide elections, the same way that we elect our governor from statewide vote. And so what there is right now is there is an amendment that's being proposed, and the process for an amendment, I don't have it down exactly, but I think it has to pass the legislature as a bill, I think maybe twice, and it has to, and it has to pass as a ballot question as well before it becomes an amendment to the state constitution. And that's the gist of it. And so right now, the legislature is pushing an amendment to divide the state of Pennsylvania into 7 regions for the purpose of electing PA Supreme Court justices, like the same way that the state is divided into 18 federal congressional districts, for example. And so that's being pushed right now. And that's something where it ties back into your local representatives. Those 203 state representatives statewide and those 50 state senators, those are the people who, if you like this idea, you can vote for and support members of the assembly that are for this. If you don't like this idea, you can vote for and support members who are against this. But this also ties into Marie's point as well about majorities. In a legislative body, majorities matter, committees matter. One party, the Republican Party, has a majority in the state House of Representatives and in the state Senate right now. So because the Republican Party has a majority, they control committee chairs and they control what legislation gets put up for a vote. And so there's legislation that would not even get a vote potentially if the other party controlled, and vice versa. So that's just a little bit of that in the process behind it, I guess.
Thanks.
Okay, we don't.
And I guess real quick, sorry, just to jump in on that, on the local politics side, the other way to affect the outcome of this, whether you're for this or against this, would be organizing for the ballot question. You know, a lot of people don't, what I just spent 3 minutes explaining, a lot of people don't know about in Pennsylvania. It's a little convoluted and it's just not something most voters are presented with. And so on the local level, that's an area that, people can organize around locally around ballot questions. There was a Marcy's Law ballot question that had to do with victims' rights that was on the ballot, and that was defeated. And there was a lot of organizing around that ballot question. So that's an area where local organizing can affect a statewide change.
Yeah, just on the ballot question issue, it's true that it tends to be very difficult. In some states, not so much, but it is difficult to get a ballot question on the statewide electoral ballot, but not impossible. And it's a real example of the way that grassroots organizing sometimes does bear fruit. Some of you may have read, there's been a lot of stuff in the national news about Florida. Back in 2018, Florida passed a ballot measure amendment to their constitution to enfranchise people who'd been convicted of felonies but fully served their sentences. And to do that, they had to get 600,000 signatures to get that on the ballot. And as somebody who had worked on that issue years before in a litigation context, I can tell you that we assumed it would be impossible to get that ballot measure up. And then it had to pass by a 60% majority. And that seemed impossible given the partisan split in the state. So we didn't even attempt it, but it was grassroots organizers in Florida, led by a man who himself had had a conviction and was unable to vote, who'd gone to law school and could not practice law because his rights had not been restored. He and other groups, of course, grassroots people, many of them were church groups, began to organize. Then they got some attention and support and some money from state and national organizations, but it really came from the grassroots. And that was the measure that was successful at changing what had been stuck in that Constitution since 1868. So now there's a whole other fight in the federal courts that I won't bore you with, but the point is, it's a real example of how grassroots organizing can develop into very important stuff. Now I have a question for everybody on the panel. We have a few minutes left, and this is something that I worry about. So I'm sure you're all aware that local news outlets have been shutting down left and right all across the country, right? For various economic and political reasons, there are fewer and fewer local news outlets. There's, of course, a ton of social media that's completely sort of separate. And then there's a few, the Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, but I forget the numbers, but it's an enormous number of local papers that have shut down. And it seems to me that local papers were really a source of reliable information about local politics. You hear all the time now that we're in these silos and you can't trust the info that comes across your Facebook feed. But the Washington Post isn't going to be reporting about an assembly race, in the suburbs of Pittsburgh. So where should I go to get the accurate information or reliable information about local politics?
Well, that's a good question and a hard one. Where I've seen that lack most clearly lately is around the upcoming election and the complexities around mail-in voting and the need for information, the need to get information to voters about how it's going to work in a fairly nimble way, because some decisions are being, kind of made in the courts up until the very last minute that influence the way that's going to unspool. And there isn't a very good channel for getting information to voters about elections. Sources of accurate information, wow, I am not sure. I mean, there are new news sources like the Pittsburgh, the Current and City Paper and stuff that have kind of come in to fill some of the gaps where the bigger papers are closing and leaving, but I'm not sure that's necessarily much more accurate. I don't know. I guess I don't have a great answer to that. Marco or Terry, do you have any thoughts about where to find good information?
Me personally, I like the City Paper. I like the City Paper. I like the Trib. I like, for me, the big papers, the big, like Post Gazette or, the big papers that been closing down. I don't think they were closing down because of money. I think that we have to look at why they were closing. And I think a couple of them for me personally, you know, like I like Deuces, you know, because of the reason that they're closing, you know. I don't, so for me, I like the Trib. I like a series, City Paper. Right now I can say that's two that I really like. I forget the radio station is. I was on the radio station too, 95.1, I think. I forget.
WESA 90.5.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah. So that's where I like to get where I believe that they're factual.
And what I'll say on that note is there's
Instead.
just as a practical matter, there's a website, politicspa.com, and they do like a daily roundup broken down by region of the state. So the daily roundup will break down, let's say, the Philadelphia area, and you'll see like a link with then a blurb, like a headline blurb of like a dozen or so different stories. And then it'll have Central Pennsylvania, and then over here into Southwestern in the Pittsburgh region. And so just as a practical matter, I'll go to politicspa.com to look at the daily roundup. And, you know, as far as like what the state legislature is doing and what Harrisburg is doing, if you scan that daily roundup, you can find, there are papers out of Harrisburg, I think it's called the Penn Capital, that covers what's going on there. It's just as a practical matter. What I'll say to the larger, maybe philosophical underpinnings of the question is, you know, maybe that's the next frontier of political organizing on some level.
I think it might be.
To empower journalism, because, you know, we can't have a functioning democracy without a free and robust press. You know, that's just an ingredient we need for this thing to bake right. And so that may be part of the new frontier of organizing.
So I see we have one last question that's come in. We're pushing up against our hour, but it's from one of my students, so I want to be sure she gets in. Alex, will you read the last question?
Sure. Yemi wants to know, does anyone have any suggestions for how young people, particularly people in their mid to late 20s, can obtain local office, for example, magistrate or other local offices? I imagine there may be issues of name recognition and the matter of experience, but is it a realistic pursuit, or is it just a matter of effective campaigning?
It's absolutely realistic. And in fact, in local elections recently, a lot of young women have attained political office. And I think maybe my advice, and Marco could speak to this from having been a candidate, but is to get sort of kind of just become part of the community of grassroots organizing. You'll figure out who is who and who's been there before you and who has advice they could give you, and just kind of talk to everybody, figure out the lay of the land. It's not as hard as you think. And a lot of people just decided one day they're sick of this and they're gonna do something about it, and they ran for office and they won. And so I think it absolutely can be done, but you got to do your homework and you got to talk to people, I think, to get the ball rolling.
I think you just made my night. You know, that question made it even better that I am here. Thank you for that question. Yes, it can be done. The classes for magistrate are free. They are in Harrisburg. There's a young lady that I know that went to one of our educational community civic series. She's taking the next class. She said it starts in November, but I thought it was always December and June. If they're in Harrisburg, if you stay at the hotel they want you to stay at, it's over $3,000 for the 8 weeks. But if you get an Airbnb, it's almost $600 or something for the whole 8 weeks. You can win. I think you said something about the name recognition. People are tired of the good old boys club, and what I mean by that is people that have been there since Jesus was a baby. You can win. I would strongly suggest to, like Marie said, get involved, listen a lot, ask plenty questions, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid you can win. Yeah.
And I'll just say the direct and simple answer is you run. You can't win if you don't run, and people are supposed to run. You know, when you step back and think about it, like, we live in a democracy, that means people are supposed to step out there and run. And so, like, you can't win if you don't run. And to kind of dovetail into what Terri and both Marie said, you can get involved. I think we have 35 or 36 days maybe left until November 3rd. You've got 35 days to call up a candidate and say, I want to volunteer on your campaign. What can I do to help? And that'll get you in the game a little bit. And then there's going to be a primary this spring, and you can jump in the game there and help a candidate that you like or and that you want to support, and that'll get you in the game a bit. So you can't win if you don't run.
Yeah, and I want to comment on, because one of the things that we do teach in our educational community civic series, only thing you need, what was the young lady's name that asked the question?
Amy.
Is a GED to be a magistrate. That's it.
Right. No
Well,
law
she's
degree
going to have a
required.
law degree, so.
Qualified.
Tell her to join Order of Phoenix.
There we
There's
go.
plenty of-
Join the
there's plenty
order.
of- Yeah, there's plenty of volunteer opportunities there.
Yeah.
All right, we are over time. I want to thank all of the panelists and Alex. This was really inspiring, and I hope that we've set the audience up for a little bit of context to fight fear as we all now go to our television sets to watch the event regarding national politics, knowing that it's not the only game in town, and it's not really what democracy is mostly about. So thank you all. It's really terrific. It was recorded. We'll put it up somewhere, and carry on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good
Good
night, all.
night.